Very well, money, very well, very well. I don't think anybody at a young age who gets famous has the slightest idea that it'll ever end. I've always said I wouldn't want to do a farewell tour because people who say that always come back. Maybe it'd be nice to celebrate 55 years of it.
Here she is, man, Miss Joan Baez.
Hey, this is David. So just letting you know, this is going to be an episode in two parts. First, you're going to hear my conversation with Allison Rapp about the movie Joan Baez, I'm a Noise, and then you're going to hear my conversation briefly with Andy Keats, my co-host, about the movie, because Andy was supposed to be with me and Allison, and then there was a flight issue and so forth. So we had to break it up into two parts. So at the end of my conversation with Allison, stay tuned for a few more minutes of me and Andy breaking down the movie even further. It's a fun movie. Hopefully you find the conversations fun. And here is Rock Docs. Okay, welcome to Rock Docs, a podcast about music documentaries brought to you by Treble Media. They are at treblezine.com. They write about music. People like to read writing about music, and it's a there seems to be sometimes less and less of it these days, at least in various places. So support them. They're cool. And yeah, normally this is where I would introduce my co-host, but due to an airline scheduling issue, he's not here. But the good news is we are blessed with the presence of, for the first time on Rock Docs, Allison Rapp. So you don't have Andy, but you do have Allison. So say hi, Allison.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the shout out to music journalists and music writing. That always helps.
Things we always like. Yes, we have an actual music.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, instead of just saying music writing consumer, we have a music writing producer here as well. So you have chosen the documentary Joan Baez, I Am a Noise, from 2023, directed by Miri Navasky, Karen O'Connor, and Maeve O'Boyle. Before we get into that, first of all, I may record a bit with Andy talking about this documentary, because he did in fact watch it because he intended to be here. So you may have already heard that in the early part of this, or maybe I'll put it after this. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But before we get into that, you have some news it's news to me that you have your own podcast now about another fantastic singer-songwriter. So why don't you just plug what you're doing?
Yeah, another woman named Joan, conveniently.
Right.
Yeah,
Cornering the market.
Exactly. It's all about Joan here. I have just launched a brand new podcast called Big Yellow Podcast. It is a show about Joni Mitchell, obviously, as you might be able to tell from the title, where essentially I'm just going through, a lot of Joni's history, both her career-wise, personal-wise, and I'm doing it sort of half just myself own solo analysis, as well as interviews with guests from people from Joni's life, people who love her, people who've been influenced by her. And yeah, that's launched. That's up on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and all of those other good places. We're on social media at Big Yellow Pod. So if you're a fan of Joni Mitchell or any of those other ancillary characters that are in Joni Mitchell's life, come check it out.
I love it. Yeah, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And yeah, definitely Big Yellow Podcast. And yeah, we were talking about why why aren't there 10 podcasts about Joni Mitchell? But fortunately, now at least we have one, so that's good.
Yes.
Anyway, so let's speak about, as everybody knows, refers to her, the other Joan.
Yes, right. I'm sure she gets that all the time.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
the OG Joan, the original Joan. Joan Baez. So kind of a weird one here, because sometimes when we're talking about a less well-known person, like we'll talk at the top about like, how did you first come to hear about this obscure artist? I'm not really sure that works with Joan Baez, but like, how did she come into your life, I guess I would ask.
Yeah, well, I mean, if it isn't obvious enough, I didn't come to Joan Baez first. I gravitated more toward people like Joni Mitchell and Carly Simon, and other female singer-songwriters who this is going to come out a little bit wrong. It's not exactly the way that I wanted to come across, but women who are singing their own songs, writing their own songs and singing them. And Joan Baez wasn't doing that, at least in the early portion of her career. And so for me, that just wasn't as gripping. It wasn't as engaging for me. I wasn't as interested in that. I was more interested in women singing their own songs. But I immediately off the bat was really intrigued by her singing style, that really crystal clear, gorgeous. I mean, they call it pure, I think is the word that a lot of people use to describe her very, very beautiful soprano singing voice. That I was drawn to, but I came to Joan Baez primarily through the door that I think a lot of people come to her through, which is through Bob Dylan and those connections that the two of them had in the early days. Those videos of them singing together at Newport, and at other concerts like that. I loved her ability to harmonize. For me, she just kind of um, served as a particular figure in the folk movement that I didn't see from people like Bob Dylan and a lot of those other characters in that particular sphere. And I grew to love her. She grew on me as time went on, certainly.
Yeah, I feel like she's one of those people where, like I certainly was always aware of her. It's not like I
Yeah.
remember having like one day discovered that she exists, like some, obscure punk band or something like that, or even an obscure folk singer songwriter, so, she's like kind of always been a big star in a way.
Mm,
Um, and I mean, I don't know about you. I kind of grew up like in like summer camp and stuff. Like a lot of it kind of like my camp counselors and teachers and stuff were like 60s folkies kind of who were
mm,
still like
mhm.
so that kind of music was around, although like it was never like played in my house or anything, so it wasn't something that I was super familiar with. So yeah, probably as I went on, it was the fact that she kept popping up as a character in the life of Bob Dylan, which is not to diminish her, but I'm just saying like in terms of my
Yeah.
own perspective of what I was into as a younger person, that I came to just, she just kept showing up and like and always in a way that was interesting,
Yeah.
not clearly not as a person who was like had any reason to be in anybody's shadow.
Sure. I mean, that's the irony too of it, isn't it? That so many people came to Joan through Bob, and I would argue that we wouldn't have Bob at all without Joan. Obviously, I
Sure.
mean, it's amazing how the the roles reverse there.
Yeah. So let's just kind of like roll through this documentary. So I guess this came out in 2023. So
Yeah.
we're in the uh, you know, sort of streaming era documentary. Andy and I kind of categorize these things like there's a lot of documentaries obviously, in the 60s and 70s, and then there was the kind of like, you know, grungier cassette oriented, video store documentaries of the, kind of 90s, maybe the early 2000s, and then, maybe the last 10 years or whatever, which is just the like, high definition streaming
Hmm.
documentaries about a, very well regarded classic artist or or something along those lines. And so this definitely falls into that category. This is I mean, I don't think you're going to be shocked by the like form of the documentary. There may be
Sure.
things that are in the documentary that are surprising to you or troubling or whatever. But it, in terms of a film, fairly conventional, mix of interviews and footage of her nowadays, or, when the film was shot a few years ago, um, with all the archival footage and things you'd expect. And, in some ways, that mix of like conventional, rock doc bio, this is where this person was born, her family, etc., the peak
Hmm.
of her career, and then like the reflections from now, and kind of like, of course, the like contemporary live footage, juxtaposed with the, sort of image that we have of her in our head from the, 60s, things like that. So I mean, that's pretty much what's on offer in terms of like a film. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I had the luxury, the advantage of being able to see it. I watched it over the weekend on my Hulu, my very small little tiny TV screen. But I saw it actually in a theater when before it came out to the general public. I went to a press screening of it. So I got to see it on a quite large screen, and I do think that there's a pretty significant difference in viewing the. I mean, there usually is in those types of films. And I remember being, on my first impressions of it, especially seeing it on a screen like that with, really quality sound and all of that. It was very powerful that way. I do wish it maybe had almost gotten a theatrical, run of some kind to do that. But in terms of the format, like you're saying, yeah, you're talking kind of run of the mill, style that way. I don't know that doing it any other way probably would have, been a service to her. I think this was probably the best route.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I don't know that, and I'm not disparaging the filmmakers. It doesn't seem like they've made a lot of other movies, but it's not like the movie has like a super strong aesthetic of its own,
Sure.
and that's fine. It's pretty much a biopic type documentary, and
Yeah.
that's what it is. And so they're relying on the narrative and the music and the character and her as a protagonist to carry you through. It does have the kind of flair element, which is like we had a little bit of a budget for this movie, which is
Mm,
nice to see. Which is that Joan, in addition to being a singer and performer, is an sort of an illustrator, I guess, and has always
yeah.
written in notebooks. So they do the thing where they kind of you know take a lot of her little, I mean, I don't want to say doodles; they're more sophisticated than that, but notebook illustrations, and animate them to animate certain parts of her life story, or to kind of express the emotions of what's happening in the moment. And I thought that was done really well. Like that can be a
Yeah.
little bit like, come on, it can be a little
Oh,
cheesy.
yeah.
Um,
Sometimes it can be quite kitschy. Yeah, for sure.
yeah.
I agree. Mhm.
Or cutesy, and I thought it really worked. I mean, it just kind of fit the tone of her and her spirit
Yeah.
and her narrative.
Yeah,
So
especially when you consider that, she was doing a lot of the film focuses, kind of looks backward at the letters she was writing home to her parents, and the little kind of cassette diary tapes that she was recording while she was on trains traveling to different shows. There's a lot of ways to portray that on a screen, obviously, and I think that was probably the best way. It's funny you were talking about like, oh, I don't want to I don't want to call them doodles or anything. One of the things that I found most appealing about this film was, I thought it was really aesthetically pleasing overall. You look at the shots of her home, for example, and it looks
oh yeah,
exactly like the kind of place that you would expect Joan Baez to live. I
right.
mean, there's this big, beautiful painting of Bob Dylan above her piano, and it's
Oh yeah,
stunning. Like, it's gorgeous, and she's got this amazing, immaculate pool, and it's surrounded by greenery, and it's very lush. You really get a much better say, even if you don't know anything about Joan Baez at all, which I would imagine a lot of people don't watching this film. You get a much better sense of who she is as an individual just by those shots alone, those images.
yeah. Like she's surrounded herself with a beautiful aesthetic. So
Yeah.
it probably was relatively easy to to like, you're not starting with like something that's a little tacky,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which can
Exactly.
sometimes be the case. Because a lot of it could be, she could have been like, well, I just want to be sitting in front of a mixing board, or
Mm.
something. Which
Oh my
I've,
gosh.
as
So
somebody who's
boring.
done nearly 100 episodes of Rock Docs, I have probably seen enough mixing boards for my
Oh
life.
my god, yeah, sitting in the studio, I mean, I'm tired of seeing those shots. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Especially if they're just sitting there. Like if they're actually working the
Yeah.
faders, at least it's a thing. But if it's
Yeah,
just
no,
like,
I love it. I mean, there's a much more active, feel to the film, I think. You've got those scenes of her working with her vocal coach,
yeah,
and learning how to use this voice that she has now in her 80s that she obviously, has had to get used to having. You see her, going on the treadmill and keeping herself in shape and walking with her dog, and she gives off, I not the impression, she is a very active person in this film, and
right.
I think that was a really important, part of the story here.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much like the sort of, you get the sense that they're trying to convey one way or the other that it's an unfiltered, intimate, you know,
Mhm.
portrait. Like you're going on tour with her, you're in her house. It's not super glamorous.
Yeah.
I mean, it's nice. She's on a nice tour bus and she's staying in nice hotel rooms and selling out theaters. She's not like, a punk, traveling in the van. But it's still like, you kind of, it's not like meeting people is easy with Radiohead or something, but you do get a little bit of that. And it's a lot of her, like, it is kind of funny to think like, because it's, you get the, classic images from the 60s and things like that, and then it'll cut to her as a, whatever, late 70s, 80s person, like walking around looking at her phone, which is what
Mm.
everybody does all
Mhm.
day,
Right.
and I wonder how that's going to be as a time capsule, because
Yeah.
in 20 years, like when we all have something implanted in our heads or something, I don't know, is that going to look super archaic? I don't, just like the way that,
Right.
the 60s stuff does now. I don't know. But it is real. I mean, that's like what a person, a person of
Yeah.
nearly any age is doing nowadays, is
Yeah.
spending a lot of time. Like she whips out her phone to take a picture of something, or, she's just like texting. God knows what she's doing. But it's like stars are just like us.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, I love that was obviously a huge part of this film that I loved the intercut footage between the archival moments, the stuff from her childhood with her siblings and her parents, the footage with Bob at Newport and things like that, intercut with the I regret very much not going to that tour, that 28 tour. So
Hmm.
seeing a lot of that on screen, I was kind of living vicariously through that. But I love I you know, maybe I haven't watched enough rock docs to be able to say this,
Oh.
but I haven't seen a whole lot of that kind of interplay between the before and the now so simultaneously presented. I usually see it in a much more chronological sense, like point A, point B, point C, this, that, and then that happened.
Right.
But for me, I could, especially as she's being so vulnerable in the story that she's telling while the film is going on, it becomes much easier to see the kind of through line from where she started to where she ended up, and like how those aspects of her character from her early days are still very much with her when she's in her older age, or what parts of her have been lost, or what parts of her have been changed, if you will. You can really see a lot how a lot of those uh flaws, if you will, or perceived flaws that she felt about herself in the early days, her in her childhood with her siblings and her parents, how that manifested through her career all the way up until 2018 when she's on tour with her own son and having some of the same issues with her own
Yeah.
kid.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, we very recently did an episode about the new Paul Simon
Oh, I haven't seen that.
documentary. Okay, so for those who have not listened to that episode, I certainly had a lot of problems with that film. And that's very much like a now cut with back and forth. So it follows that same format, but it's,
Yeah.
in my opinion, not I don't know. There I I don't want to relitigate that film, but I had some issues with it. This is done a little bit better, I
Sure.
would say. Um yeah, the contemporary sequences are Joan now going on her farewell tour. Like she just feels like for whatever reason, her her body, her voice, her whatever are holding up to the point that she feels comfortable, but that the clock is sort of running out, and she wants
Right.
to I guess the best way I would say it is she seems like she wants to go out on her own terms,
Mm.
and respect that, as opposed to
Yeah.
just hanging on forever. And I mean, either way is fine. But some people, I'm going to see Willie Nelson in a couple months, and Bob, of course, and
God love him. Yeah.
yeah. So and they'll they're gonna die in the saddle. It seems like, and that's fine.
Oh
But
yeah.
she clearly wanted to to just call it a day.
Hmm.
And I guess that's the impetus for this. But all right. So just kind of running through it. So um, we get a lot about her family.
Yeah.
And her father was an academic who kind of went all around the world. And so she, had this experience of living in, I don't know, Beirut and here, there, Mexico, all these different places. And she, of course, is, one of three sisters. We meet Pauline briefly at the beginning of the movie, and then she doesn't really come back. I kind of felt like maybe she's gonna be more of a character, but she comes back a
Mm.
little bit, but not as much. Pauline was, I guess, the older sister who just did not pursue a public career
Right.
as much as her younger sisters did. So it's cool to see her. It's cool that they have this great relationship. I think she has subsequently passed, if I'm not mistaken. But
Yeah. Both of them, both of the sisters. Yeah.
yeah, and obviously Mimi. I mean, for those who know this world, I mean, Mimi was the younger of the youngest of the three sisters, and she um once Joan became a huge star, as a late teenager. Mimi, who kind of also had a, great voice and was very charismatic, um, sort of through pressure or something else,
Mm.
kind of, it seems like followed that path. She got connected, married at a young age to Richard Farina, who was also a singer on the folk scene, and so they were kind of known as a duo for a while. Of course, Richard dies in a motorcycle accident at a very young age, and then Mimi, I guess, the film, says, and Joan says that, because of her mental health issues and everything, she just kind of struggled with that and never really found herself. I think she
Yeah.
eventually passed of cancer, but um, it sort of broke her. And that's the story that I always kind of knew. This doesn't necessarily change that narrative, but we spend a lot of time with that. But the film later on goes into, I'm just kind of jumping around. Um, Joan being in therapy in the 80s and 90s and being told by Mimi about sexual abuse by her father, and then Joan confronting it and thinking about it. And it's such a, um, I don't even know how to put it. I mean, it's
Hmm.
pretty powerful because
It
Joan,
is.
like, she doesn't know what's true and what's not true. And she's very aware of that, meaning, like, she has
Yeah.
feelings about things that may have happened, she constructs a narrative, but she's very upfront about saying, like, she knows that there is also a, like, false victim narrative, like, that is something that
Yeah.
happens, is people who have false memories suggested to them by therapists or just due to circumstances, and she's just really struggles with that, not, her relationship with her parents, and she's
Hmm.
upfront with them in their later days, and it's just such a, I mean, a lot of this film is about her mental health, and
Right.
it's yeah, it's not what I was expecting.
No, what I remember viewing the film the first time and leaving the theater and thinking, "Ooh, there are some people who probably aren't really gonna appreciate this or connect with that or believe her or trust her." And it seems that she knows that very distinctly. Like, she is aware that this is not gonna come across the same way to everybody and that not everybody is gonna hold the same opinion of it. But I have to believe that, I mean, for one thing, I think one of the other things that I learned that was really powerful, and I don't exactly quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure she was speaking to an interviewer after this film came out, and she was asked something to the effect of, like, "Oh, well, why did you decide to put this film out, now at this particular point in time?" And she said something to the effect of, "I had to wait until my parents were dead and gone. That
Mm,
she couldn't put this film out when they were alive and around to see it, for one reason or another." Obviously, that's an incredibly personal decision to make, but for some reason, she didn't feel like this film could exist in the world at the same time that her parents did. And I think that's a pretty brave thing to be able to say that publicly, especially when it's your whole life on a film.
right, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, going back to what you were saying, I think a lot of that, her her willingness to recognize that the spectrum of victimhood is really vast and really complicated, also comes apart from her. She's spent her whole career trying to reach out to victims of different circumstances and ages and backgrounds. I mean, she's been doing that literally since she was a child. And, there's a point in the film where she talks about when she first rose to fame and suddenly all eyes were on her. And she says, "I didn't want to be privileged when there were so many people who had no privileges." And I think that's still very clearly, when she was making this film, something she struggles with, this idea of identifying as a victim even when you feel as though other people are more victim like, if you will, than you are. But still at the same time being able to recognize that that is a valid expression to put out into the world, especially as an artist and especially as somebody who people look to. It's very clear from the film that that is a really complicated thing that she has wrestled with for decades and will likely wrestle with for, I mean, the rest of her life, really.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense because, she talks about how, like, basically her mother sort of denied anything that was said about her father, and,
Yeah.
and in the film, you see her taking care of, like, very physically taking care of her
Mm-hmm.
very elderly mother who, was, maybe it must have been in her 90s, and, feeding her, and I mean, she looks like she's more or less on her deathbed.
Yeah.
I'm not technically a doctor, but, it does seem that way. Um, but So, that does make sense that she would kind of, um, feel like, I mean, she's the only one left. Her sisters are gone
Yeah.
and her parents are gone, and maybe that is freeing in a way.
Yeah. It seems like that was a pretty prevalent theme throughout her whole life. She became the star of her family and she had to kind of look out for,
Right,
her other sisters and her parents. Um, she met Bob Dylan, and Bob Dylan was a very boyish, childlike character that she ended up kind of quote unquote taking care of. I mean, I'm pretty sure she says
right,
specifically in the film that
yeah,
like I mothered him.
right.
Which is a whole other can of worms that, women in positions of fame and authority, have to deal with. But there is another example of that. This idea that a very big thing, and later in her life, when she gets married and her husband goes to prison, and she's left alone with their very small child that she has to raise essentially on her own for
Right,
months at a time while being a touring artist. So this idea, you know, permeating through the film of her having to look out for other people,
right,
both people really close to her in her life and also people not close to her at all. I mean, marching for civil rights, people that she doesn't know
right.
whatsoever. So her whole life has revolved around this idea of helping others. And now she's finally reached this point in time where she feels like she needs to help herself a little bit. And it's clear that that feels a little strange to her.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, not being a deep head, I mean, I think this movie sort of tracks my sense of her career, for better
Hmm.
or worse. I mean, the film kind of, this is one of those movies about a classic artist from the 60s, let's say, where you're watching the movie and it's, let's say it's 2 hours long, and you look and it's, you're an hour into the movie and it's like 1963 and you're like, oh, we're
Right.
not going to spend a lot of time what she was doing
Yeah.
in 2005. Like, that's not going
Right.
to be the subject of this movie. This is not the like Joker Man late period um type of approach. For and I wish that I do, what that is one criticism that I have about the movie and about many of these movies, is like, when people find the time to delve into those aspects of somebody's career, I do find it interesting.
Yeah.
But obviously, you're trying to make a movie, you're trying to get funding, it's not easy to do it. And like, what are you going to focus on? That, you wanted, she's marching with Martin Luther King, obviously that
Hmm.
has more, you know I don't know, it I who am I to say? So, okay. But my sense of her career was basically like, okay, she had her, kind of, she became a star. She had the Bob Dylan period. And then, she went on to be involved in civil rights and opposing the Vietnam War and all these other things while she was carrying on this music career. She had Diamonds and Rust, which was her big solo success, and as a songwriter. And then it's kind of like that's sort of it. In terms of
Mm.
like, she certainly performed, she made records, but the 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 breakthrough as a songwriter doesn't repeat. And it's
Yeah.
kind of a bummer in a way that the song is generally thought to be about Bob. So like, her
I
one
know.
big triumph as a songwriter, not that there's anything wrong with being just an interpreter of other people's songs, but her one big triumph is also the thing that like is
Yeah.
kind of hung on her career. Okay. But I guess the movie kind of tries to excuse that or explain that by then delving into the mental health issues that plagued her more and more, as she went on. Panic
Sure.
disorder. She talks about how she was addicted to Quaalude. It's always in this,
Mm.
it's never
Hmm.
Quaaludes. I've never heard of somebody being addicted to one Quaalude before. Like, I was addicted to a heroin.
One.
Just all, yeah, I never heard that before. So I don't know. Not
Oh my gosh.
but yeah, it's Quaalude, singular, and then dealing with all the issues with her sister, and the dealing with the therapy, unleash, revealing,
Yeah.
feelings about childhood abuse, sexual trauma, other things like that. um, I guess that kind of is meant to explain why, she didn't, I mean, why she didn't, not that she didn't pursue a career as an artist, because she made plenty of
Mm.
records, and I'm sure there are people probably who are listening to this who are like, her 2000 album is great and you should listen to it. And the things I've checked out things from time to time, but it's never grabbed me. So I'm not the
Yeah.
person to say whether that narrative holds up if you were to like really dig deep into the catalog.
Sure.
But at least it seems like that's her perspective as well. I mean, she kind of says like, after that I kind of lost my way. The
Yeah.
Conspiracy of Hope tour, she's like covering Tears for Fears. It's kind of, it clangs pretty hard, and
Yes,
and she
it
admits
does.
that it's just not really working, and she just, seems like an artist who, one of those classic artists who, commercially at least, couldn't really find their way, past
Yeah.
their, that kind of 60s and 70s era. I don't know if you have a different perspective or.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a, I think, 80s interview clip in there where she's doing a television interview. She talks about this idea of feeling, I don't know exactly the word she used, but she talked about the idea of feeling um, fearful of the idea that she says, I may not be able to do anything grand for the rest of my life. That this
Right.
is this like overwhelming sense that she has, that like she recognizes on a really deep cellular level that the good, like the glory days are over, and that this is kind of the trajectory of her career for the rest of, not really sure how long. But I certainly, I will fully admit I'm not necessarily an academic when it comes to Joan Baez's career. I don't know exactly if this holds up to everything that maybe should be included in a really cohesive roundup of her career. But I don't think that matters in this sense, and I don't think that hinders really the film necessarily. I don't think you lose
No.
anything, and in fact I think you gain actually more from not covering that stuff and going in depth. I think you get more of a sense of, like you said, this feeling of not really understand what's happening in the world around her, not being able to connect with the people who are Tears for Fears, all of these other like giants of the
Right.
industry who are seemingly doing fantastic, and she can't connect with them. She can't really figure out what the groove is. She doesn't really know where her place is in the industry anymore. And a lot of that has to do with her own, personal mental health. But I think a lot of it also has to do with, the way that she was um, treated throughout the course of her career prior to that. Like you said, so much of her career has been viewed through the lens of people like Bob Dylan and other, artists who are surrounding her. That led her to a period of her career where it was like, oh, well, now that she's not connected to those people, what's the point?
Right.
And it's funny, even there's somewhere in the middle of the film where she, breaks the fourth wall and says, "Hey, Bob," like she's talking to him through the camera. She knows that people are going to be watching this film, waiting for something like that to happen. So anyway, but I seem to recall my first impression of this film, and I got an even stronger impression of it watching it the second time, that this was, very much a film that she did for herself, and it was very much for her own, peace of mind and sanity, really. Because she has been portrayed so often and for so long as being this kind of side character figure in a lot of other people's
Right.
careers,
Or muse.
or a muse, yeah, that this was a piece simply by her for her. And I think, this is something that's becoming a little bit more prevalent in rock and roll coverage, especially now. And it's something that I've started to dig into a little bit more while I've been doing all this Joni Mitchell work. This idea of women getting to tell the stories that they want to tell, when they want to tell them, how they want to tell them, and why they want to tell them.
Sure.
Which sounds like kind of a simplistic thing when it's said like
Yeah.
that, but especially when you are someone who is that public and that famous, you're not automatically granted that right or given that luxury.
Oh, sure.
And I certainly think that this is a prime example of something like that.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. First of all, there's no way this movie comes off as exploitative. I mean, even though it's dealing
No.
with all these issues, this clearly is a first-person narrative,
Yeah.
and this is the, I don't know if she had final cut or whatever. I do know Patti Smith was one of the
She
producers of this film,
was.
which is
She was an
super
executive
cool.
producer. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I don't know, they don't mention their relationship at all. Perhaps they cross paths during Rolling Thunder. That was my thought.
Oh, yeah,
But
perhaps.
you
Mhm.
know, but I don't know. Famously, both appear in the 100% accurate and factual Rolling Thunder review, a Bob Dylan story by Martin Scorsese, which was the first episode of Rock Docs, and which I still love. And also, if you
Yes.
like Joan Baez, by the way, the funky dancing by Joan in that
Oh,
doc
yeah,
is
worth
the
it
best.
alone.
Yes.
Worth it
Yeah.
alone.
We've mentioned her songwriting and singing and performing and
Her
being
dancing.
the illustrator, but her funky dancing skills
Her
are
funky
which are
dancing.
on
You
display in
can
this
see it in
doc.
this film too. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. The art of funky dancing is certainly something that we could do a whole doc about that as well. But okay, so anyway, I lost the plot with her funky dancing. But yeah, no, it's not.
Yeah.
It's certainly not exploitative. This is clearly her perspective, and you got to also remember, like, she was effectively like a child star. I mean, she goes to
Yeah.
Harvard when she's 18, and she said she was just bored.
Yeah.
I love it. like same girl.
Yeah,
um
exactly.
um and she goes to Harvard, and so just like out of boredom she starts hanging out at these folk clubs, and as far as you could tell, like she picked up guitar one day and started singing, and like one day there was 3 people and the
Uh-huh.
bartender wiping down the bar, and by the time next week rolled around in her next gig there was a line out the door, and like she's never not sold out a concert since then.
Yeah,
And so
exactly.
she's like 18 years old, and just a striking person in like, in terms of her presence and everything, and her
Yeah.
voice and the whole thing. And just like, this is not a saga of somebody knocking at the door of the record industry for years and not succeeding, and the first 5 albums don't sell. And, this is
Mhm.
not that story. This is like, she is on a rocket ship to success right away.
Yeah.
And, she just happened to catch the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, in addition to her own talent and merits, like it was the right time and place for that kind of person.
Well, yeah, I
Um,
mean, she even says that directly in the doc.
yeah,
People have asked her for years, like, why do you think that you were so successful, or why do you think people? And she says flat out, I had the right voice at the right time, and if she had come along 10 years later, God knows what would
sure.
have happened, or 10 years prior to that. But yeah, I think that's a really, really crucial aspect of the film, and I'm glad they spent so much time on it because, that shows you how when you're 18 and you only have so many personal relationships in your life, and then suddenly you go from like really only knowing your nuclear family and your little group of friends to suddenly everyone in the world knowing your name, it doesn't give you a whole lot of time to practice interpersonal relationships with other
Right,
human beings and what that's like. And she talks later in the film, the 2018 version of her, about, she says, I'm not really good with one-on-one relationships. I'm great with one on 2000. That
right,
was literally, I mean, that was her day one. So it makes a lot
right.
of sense that, the things that happened to her one-on-one with people really important to her in her childhood are things that she would not want to talk about for years and bury for years and really kind of push to the side because she felt so much more comfortable in front of thousands of unknown faces.
Yeah. And the amazing thing is that there is footage of her from 1958 or whatever that
Mm,
was, when she's 18
mhm.
years old,
Yeah.
performing in this club in Harvard. For, it was on TV or something like that. And and I mean, we haven't talked at all about the music and performance in the film really, but I mean, there's just like, obviously it goes without
It's
saying,
great.
there's
Yeah.
a lot of great
It's
footage
really
of her
good.
singing her ass off. And
Yeah.
she again is not an artist who had to find her voice, like, well,
Yeah.
the first few albums don't sound like her. No, she just like opened her mouth and
Exactly.
that came out. I mean, obviously the family sang together and she had that background. But it is kind of like, we also did a documentary on the Linda Ronstadt
Mm.
an episode of Linda Ronstadt documentary. I guess there's some similarities in the sense that she's primarily an interpreter, and also a person who like came from a family where singing, people were just singing, and like
Yeah.
she just obviously had this like unbelievable voice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I guess a little bit of a crossover there, but yeah. So I get the movie doesn't spend a lot of time then like with her discussing how that went. It's like, it's kind of assumed like, okay, she's a big star,
Mhm.
and she's off and running. It doesn't even like, it's not even the kind of movie where they're talking about albums she made or like
No.
singles hitting the charts. It's not that kind of thing. That's
There's
not the
no
subject of the movie.
conversation. I remember even when I watched it over the weekend, I was like, "Did they say Columbia or Vanguard
Right.
Records, like, at all through the whole
Yeah.
film?" I don't think that gets
Nothing.
mentioned
Yeah.
once.
They mention like, then it just starts that she meets this woman,
Yeah.
Kim, and she has a, relationship for, I guess, a few years with her. It's the only time that aspect of her uh sexuality is brought up. And
I
maybe
found
that's the
that
only maybe that's the
curious.
only
Yeah.
relationship she had with a woman. I don't know. I kind of expected that to be a running theme through the film.
I did
But
too. It was interesting how she essentially treated it as like, "Yeah, and then that happened," and then,
yeah,
she was
exactly.
like,
And then Bob
"Next
Dylan came
chapter."
along.
Yeah, and then Bob Dylan came, and it was like, "Okay, that part of my life is over."
Yeah.
I thought she was gonna spend a little bit more time discussing that, and that was gonna be a little bit more of a running theme, but it's also pretty interesting how she was able to just kind of, like, close one chapter of a book and open the next one.
Yeah, it also is kind of interesting that like, I guess obviously in those days, like she was a big star, but she wasn't,
Yeah.
there was no social media and she wasn't being followed by paparazzi. So like,
Mm.
there's no sense that like she had to keep this in the closet, so to speak. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
right.
she obviously was not like talking about it to the New York Times or something, but like it's also does seems like, well, like in the circumstances that she was living in the folk
Yeah,
scene in
in
Greenwich
the folk
Village,
community.
you know, it probably would just not a big deal. And she was young enough probably just to not think it was a big deal. And then it
Exactly.
came and passed. And so then she just moved on. And so
Right.
you get her obviously like, you know, spending time with Martin Luther King and all, you know, I mean, all that. And then, you know, our close friend, Bob comes along, Bobby, as
Close
she
friend.
says. Um, I mean, it's kind of what you expect.
Mhm.
You see her doing an impression of him singing, which is fabulous.
One of the
Um,
best,
just
easily, I think.
really,
Yeah.
yes. Many have tried, but I'm gonna hand it to Joan. Um, also, like you just again, this is not a new observation, but you just got to remember, like she's a huge star, and you see her bringing him out to like sing a
Mhm.
song, and he is so confident. Like, where does this come from? Like, he's like 20.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, where the hell does he get off?
And even in those first performances, the audience is like, "What the hell is
Yeah,
happening? Like, who is this guy, and why is
right.
he out
Yes.
here?" Yeah.
Yes, which to be fair is
Well,
also
I would
sometimes
act the same way. Yeah,
people, and
exactly.
also to this day. So I've been in Bob Dylan concerts where that also
"Who the
was the
hell is
response of
he?"
the
Yeah.
audience
"What's going
64
on?"
years later.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
okay.
Mhm.
But yeah, like boy, our guy certainly did not lack confidence in what he was
No,
doing.
and that seemed to be a really, I mean, I can't remember, I can't quote her from this exact portion of the film, but that seemed to be what she needed at the time that she needed, or at least that was how it kinda came across to me in the description of it, that, you know, here was this guy who had the confidence level of 10 men, and she had the confidence level of no one. You know, she felt
Right.
really sheltered and isolated and confused. And to have that kind of juxtaposition of that character against her own, I think was really important, just, you know, for her own personal well-being, I suppose. I don't know if you know, if you asked her today whether or not she um regretted her relationship with Bob, or how she felt it went, or what she would do differently, I don't know what she would say, but it seemed like there was something of a symbiotic relationship, you know, between the two of them then.
Yeah, obviously they stayed in each other's lives on and off for
Yeah.
quite some time, at least into the 80s. You know, I certainly don't know about recently, but I mean, she's got a big picture of him over her piano and she continues to
Right.
sing his songs. And
Right.
so, you know, there's, you know, probably at least some mutual respect if you know, I don't know that they're
Certainly.
like I don't know that they have a text thread going or something, but you
Oh
know,
my god, I would
maybe,
love it if
please.
they had a text thread going. Yeah.
How great would it be if, like, in the future, when all these people are, you know,
We get
many
texts
years from now, that
between
like the
Joan and
Rock and
Bob.
Roll Hall of Fame has like all the, you know, aging rock stars text threads from the 2010s, 2020s,
I
whatever.
wanna know what emojis get sent back and forth between them, that kinda
Right.
stuff.
Like
Yeah,
I'm just fantasizing. Like,
so
does
funny.
Bruce and the E Street Band have a text thread going? Like, and like, you know, is Jake Clemens is when did he get invited into the thread?
Yeah, right?
I have so many questions about this. There has
Oh,
to
we
be
could go,
somebody, please.
there's gotta be something. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly, that's too funny.
Yes. Share the text threads, people. Or maybe just bequeath them. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Something like that. Like
it's
you
his,
know, we're gonna
it's
agree.
historical, yeah, property at that point.
Right. It's like the Presidential Records Act. There should be an act where like rock stars have to you know, share for you know, once everybody on the thread is no
It's
longer
in
with
the public
us,
domain, yeah.
it becomes yeah, researchers are able to access this. This is now like my mission. I'm gonna start like a GoFundMe. Uh,
I will support this 100%, yeah.
okay. I've now found my yeah, but much like she got engaged with civil rights and Martin Luther
Yeah.
King, this is my version of that. Okay. Um so okay. So all right. One of the things in this documentary, probably if there's anything that I say that I felt like clanged a little hard, almost
Mhm.
as hard as her version of Shout, uh is okay. So we know obviously this is a person who like put herself on the line for civil rights. I'm not denying that at all.
Yeah.
And she was, you know, close with Martin Luther King and all these people, you know, no question about that. Just saying that. However, um she's talking about that time, and then the film goes into a kind of montage of sort of fairly heavy-handed images of contemporary urban poverty, I would say.
Mm,
And then
mhm.
it leads into a contemporary performance on her farewell tour of her singing the song No More Auction Block.
Mhm.
which I mean, again, I don't know, like it's a little I understand that you know w- y- whatever. Okay. You know what I'm trying to say here. Then okay, and I'm like, all right, this is a famous song that she sings, and maybe nowadays like a sort of semi-white coated person, let's just say, would not necessarily, young person, this would not necessarily be singing that song, but okay.
Mm.
Um then it cuts to an audience, which is, her audience is older, mostly it
Mm.
seems like
Mhm.
affluent white people. And they're it seems like they're striving to find the, black fans in the audience. And then it cuts to a scene after the concert of her being like hugged and kissed by a like group of, African American women
Yeah.
who are just thanking her and all this stuff. And it's like, again, I'm sure all these things happened. I'm not denying the experience of any of these people or that she has a passionate fan base in that community who respects her as an artist and also for what she did. All these things are true. It just didn't really hit right for the documentary. It just seemed like, do we
Yeah.
have to do the, savior thing quite,
It
do
just
go
doesn't
quite this
and it
hard?
just doesn't make a whole lot of sense really either. It happens awful fast, and it's like suddenly these women are saying these things to her, and they're saying things like, "Oh, what you did for this city, what you did for blah," and there's no like surrounding context about, like why exactly are these women saying this to her right now in this moment? Like we don't really
Right.
get that. It's
Exactly.
just it's just these shots of her being thanked. And then like, other points in this film, it just moves on.
Right,
That's it. That's
exactly.
the end
It's
of that.
just
Yeah.
and you could say, well, okay, Joan could, certainly, could look at her as a person of color, sure, but that's not how she was really presented
Mm.
in her heyday. That's not
No.
so. Okay, I probably have said all I should say about that, but again, it just didn't
No,
quite
I
rub the
don't,
right
and
way.
I'm also not the person to speak on this, but I
No,
do think there probably was another way that that could have been laid out that wasn't the way that it it was.
right. So then, you get into the other things that she did. She's talking about how she's like having this career as a musician while she's, I mean, she says at one point, in so many words, she said, I was addicted to activism. I was addicted to
Mm.
activism. And like after Vietnam, she was sort of lost. She had founded this school for nonviolence and was really involved with that. You see some of that sort of training that they were doing for nonviolent peaceful resistance. And, you know, Ollie say, I like that she put it that way, that she was addicted to
Mm.
activism because it clearly like
Mhm.
you can be doing the right thing and doing something that is, noble and virtuous. And also not necessarily doing it for the wrong reasons, but doing it because it's trying to fill some kind of hole,
Yeah, in
or
yourself. Right,
yeah,
exactly.
and
Mhm.
you would hope that somebody is able to do the right thing and also, be doing it out of a healthy
Yeah.
psychological place. And she is very aware now at this age,
Yeah,
that
definitely.
that was not really the case. And she doesn't really try to reconcile those things.
Mm.
But again, it's just a different perspective that is so welcome. Versus just saying like this person is a saint,
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
so I really like that. I don't know, that just kind of struck me. That'll stick with me.
Yeah, certainly. She in the beginning of the film, she talks about this idea of her she says a social consciousness formed before the voice developed because everybody, usually kind of assumes it's the other way around. Like you get famous
Right.
and then
Then
you
you're like,
want
what
to
am I
do
going to
these
do with
things
this
because you have,
microphone?
yeah, what am I going to do with this platform, this microphone? Which I mean, don't get me wrong, I think is an inherently good thing and more people should be doing that. And there are a lot of people who are currently hyper famous right now who don't do enough of that using that platform. But for her, it's very clear from the very beginning up through the civil rights, up through all of these different things that the social part of this was um completely necessary, and without it she wouldn't be doing this at all. Like she would not have been Joan Baez, she would not have been on stage with Bob Dylan. Like her life would not be what it is had that social consciousness not been formed first and foremost. But I totally agree with you. I mean, I the whole film to me offers this sense of taking responsibility for a lot of things that she hasn't for years, or kind of recognizing certain mistakes that she didn't at the time, acknowledging certain mistakes through the lens of 80-year-old Joan Baez. And yeah, I mean, I don't see too much of that, especially with, I'm thinking of like her contemporary like rock stars right now. trying to think of other people who have done it that way, and I'm kind of
Right.
coming up flat. I mean, I'm running into I hate to do this again, but I'm running into a lot of that right now with Joni Mitchell and her own like history with racial profiling.
Right.
And that's a really complicated can of worms that
Right.
she has
Yeah.
never owned up to.
Right.
So, you know, comparing those two in my head, it's a no-brainer that I'm proud of Joan Baez for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know. You can't expect people to be perfect all the time and always do the right
Yeah.
thing. And so, when somebody does, that should be applauded. But again, it just is kind of interesting that she is now aware of,
Mm.
why she was trying to save the world. And, I think the world to some extent benefited
Yeah.
from that. So good. She was able to channel that energy to something positive when probably a lot of other people, a lot of other musicians and just regular humans, have some trauma that they channel into less positive areas.
Mm.
And so,
Mhm.
that's all good. I think we kind of covered it because we've kind of come around to like where the movie kind of lays off, and
Yeah.
you get a little bit of the Quaalude, the one individual Quaalude that caused her so much problems. It's like an
Yes.
after school special when you take
It was
one
a
drug and
really
then
strong yeah, good.
again, and yeah, I mean, I do sometimes struggle with the thing of a documentary about an older, legacy artist that's going to like show them on tour now and singing now versus back then. Sometimes that is, just kind of a bummer.
Mm.
I've seen a
Mhm.
few documentaries that I can think of where
Yeah.
I'm just like, well, okay, cool. It's cool that you're still doing it, but it doesn't really sound the same. And it's kind of blah. Like we just had to
Yeah.
stick this in because we had the footage and we followed them on tour, and it'd be kind of lame if we didn't. Um,
Mhm.
and then other times when it really works and the person still has energy and vitality. And, I think, Joan went out, I mean, she's still around, but in terms of as a touring performing artist, like she went out at, it's still being able to, she didn't have the like, unbelievably powerful voice, but
Mhm.
she like if you'd never heard Joan Baez before and you played some music from her last tour, like this stuff, you wouldn't think like, boy, this person sucks. Like they're just drafting
No.
off of, you know what I mean? Like
Mhm. No.
it's not that kind of situation where sometimes you do get that. Um,
Sure.
she still has something to say and she's still got it. And so, she clearly is holding an audience. And, so it's, I think that part, that kind of works. And, it's nice to see that kind of closure. I mean, clearly she's still
Yeah.
struggling with things.
Sure.
Um, it's not all wrapped up in a neat little bow and she's
Mhm.
still on a journey, but that's
Yeah.
also like life, that's like kind of the story that she's telling.
Yeah, and I mean that's the wall that a lot of these artists are running into now, how to handle their kind of final act of their careers. And for some people, like for Bob Dylan and Willie Nelson, that involves literally, I'm convinced they're gonna die on stage, and
Yeah.
a lot of people are gonna see it, and that's gonna be how it happens. And there's other people for whom, the strings never really get fully tied up. Like, just today, for example, Brian Wilson is in a conservatorship
Sure.
now. He's been
Right.
placed in conservatorship, and that's a very sad kind of ending to a career
Right.
that has a lot to it, and to not have it kind of neatly packaged up is unfortunate in a lot of ways. So I think it's really important, and honorable really, when you have an artist like Joan Baez who has decided, I want this to very much be on my own terms. I'd like to tell this how I'd like to tell it. There's some other things that I'd like to tie up, and here it is, take it or leave it kind of
Yeah.
thing. So for her to be able to do that for herself mainly, I think is crucial.
Yeah. Um, so I think we covered most of it. I would also say, I mean, Joan Baez, great hair. Let's just say,
Yes,
fantastic
fabulous
hair.
hair.
Yeah.
I
props,
agree.
yeah, props. What great head of hair. But
I've always liked her image, generally speaking. I think
yeah,
she's still got it going, and she looks great. She says that in the film too. For her age now, I actually thought she was younger. I don't know where I got that. Probably because she looks like that. But
yeah, yeah.
I mean,
No,
she's always had a very, very fantastic image.
yeah. And yeah. That I think that was kind of my my last note here.
Yeah. No,
Anything we didn't. I mean,
definitely.
there's other great stuff that you see her. When she has her baby. and she's
Yeah,
on a TV show, and they bring out the baby, and she sings to the baby. That's quite beautiful.
that's quite nice.
There's some, and again, we kind of just glossed over Diamonds and Rust. They do get into that,
Yeah.
and that whole kind of resurgence of what that kind of felt like. But I don't know, any major highlights or bits that we missed here.
No, I mean, I loved some of the other bits and points that kind of tie everything together. This like theme of her going barefoot through her life, both
Yeah.
then and now. This theme, her dancing is
Yeah.
a theme through this, and this very clear urge that she feels to be around people and to move around people, whatever that happens to look like in the particular setting. So I mean, I think overall, I really liked this film. I was a fan, and I was glad to watch it again. And I'm glad that she made it.
Yeah, I was glad also, just to make a point, that they didn't do any talking heads type stuff, meaning like,
Yeah.
there's no there's no other rock stars or other people or like younger people
Yeah.
now, like I don't
It's
know,
just her
whoever it would
family.
be, who's like
Yeah.
oh, she was such an inspiration and blah blah blah. Like, it's not that kind of thing, which sometimes that works, sometimes it's kind of corny.
Yep.
But we don't necessarily need to hear, I don't know, whoever. Name
Yeah.
a current singer who's like, I
No,
love
I
Joan
mean,
Baez.
it
Like,
was
cool, Pink, you like Joan
much
Baez,
more
whatever. I don't know.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, I was I'd never heard from her older sister before. Like, that was the
Right.
first time I think I'd ever seen her on a screen talking in an interview like that. So I think that was a much better choice.
Exactly. So,
Yeah.
cool. Well, thank you for suggesting this one. Again, if you are a fan of Joni Mitchell or podcasts or just Allison, or all the above,
Hopefully all three. Yeah.
yeah, hopefully all three, then check out Big Yellow Podcast. Is that right?
Yeah.
Big Yellow
Yeah. Thank
Podcast.
you.
And yeah, all the luck in the world with that. And
Thank you.
yeah, thanks again for doing this. Thanks everybody for listening to Rock Docs. We're again brought to you by Treble Media, treblezine.com. Support them, they're cool. And we will talk to you next time. Okay, let's just run down some thoughts about Joan Baez, I Am a Noise. So I guess people who are listening to this, if you're still with us, you've previously heard of the conversation, but Andy was not able to make it because of a flight snafu. So you can blame, I don't know, some airline.
Delta.
This,
you can blame Delta.
Yes, you can call Delta and say, messed up my rock doc the week. Yeah, let's just get some quick takes on this one. First of all, I just want to point out that this is the longest standing, perhaps, bit that's finally come back around is from our very first episode, appreciation of Joan Baez's funky dancing.
I obviously made it into my notes.
Now, nearly 100 episodes of Rock Docs later, that bit has finally come around and paid off.
How little we knew back then that she has always been a funky dancer. That I caught that clip in Rolling Thunder Review and thought, wow, look, I don't associate that.
It was a one-time thing.
That was a one-time thing. Turns out, as a child, she was doing a lot of funky dances with her sisters in the back seats of cars and out on the playgrounds, what have you, and all through her career, really.
Yeah. So okay, respect to that.
Yep.
Okay.
She even says at one point that she was very interested in being groovy, being funky and groovy, I think she says, or cool and groovy.
I mean, I too am very interested in being groovy.
Yes.
So far, it's not happened in 47 years, but
this happened during her Quaaludes era. So
I'm gonna have to correct you there.
Yeah, Quaalude.
Quaalude, singular.
Yeah, she does.
One Quaalude.
Yeah, she did emphasize the singularity multiple times. She said it multiple times. She said Quaalude.
It stood out to me because I never heard that. Anyway, not being a Quaalude or Quaaludes guy.
Mhm.
Anyway, yeah. So she got groovy. She got funky.
My experience to Quaaludes mostly comes through the game, the TI-83 game Drug Wars. Did you have Drug Wars on TI-83 calculators when you were in high school?
Yes. Yeah. I don't remember it that well, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyway.
I think I was doing math on mine.
Yeah.
Oh,
I was mostly playing Drug Wars.
I definitely was not. I can tell you that about my academic career. Not a lot of math. Anyway, all right. What else you got?
Well, so for one thing that stood out, I thought this was a beautiful movie. I thought that, a lot of the archival footage that they have, the black and white footage, was used really well. I thought it was really, really a joy to look at. And quite a bit of music too.
Yeah.
We often remark on rock docs that don't give us enough of the musician that we're here to see, and that's should be, I think, almost all the time should be a pretty big piece of any one of these. And we get a lot of Joan Baez's music from, singing with her sisters when she's a little girl, all the way up through her 2018 final concert. So 2 strong points there.
Yeah.
Now the biggest thing, I presume this was a big part of your conversation, is maybe never in a rock doc have we had such a Shyamalan twist ending. You just get the rug pulled out from under you on her childhood. Was that not your experience watching this movie? That the sort of rug out from under you sensation of, because there are breadcrumbs. There are clearly breadcrumbs. What we basically get the story of a happy childhood and family life for her. It is pointed out that she had anxiety.
Right.
It is pointed out that she has this, feud with her sister, both of her sisters to different extents based on her level of fame. But she's writing letters to her family, beautiful letters. She's writing to her family throughout her career, and we see a lot of those. That you sort of get a picture, I think, of a happy domestic life. And then in the final act of the film, we learn that her sister had a sudden memory of being assaulted by her father, and that led Joan to go to a therapist who retrieved suppressed memories. And she, sort of reveals that she had been the victim of abuse growing up. And I, by all means, I like the inclusion of that in here, and I think I understand the filmmaker's desire to make it a revelation, much in the way it was a revelation later in life to Joan. That the sort of the way it comes to Joan is the way it comes to us in the movie. So I get that, but it does feel sort of underhanded almost, to that.
Yeah.
Your understanding of her life changes so abruptly there at the end.
But that's, I guess, true of her life, right? Because
Right.
we didn't really talk. I mean, we talked about this issue when I talked with Allison. There was this little bit. Yeah, I can see how it came off as a little bit of a twist. I mean, I felt that way watching it, but it also seemed true to her life that, like, later in her life, all this stuff. And she's very forthright about not really knowing how much is true, how much is,
Yeah.
whatever. I don't want to say imagine, but she can't really pin a lot of things down.
Yeah, I think she uses a specific word that she says something like, "I'm smart enough to understand that some of these, memories that I have are false," or something like that.
Right. There's like implanted memories. I think
Implanted. Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
that was kind of a thing going on. And this is maybe the 90s. So, like, it's maybe when she's in her 40s. So, from the perspective of the movie, it's later in her life. And it's definitely, yeah, it's handled well, I would say. And it definitely, yeah. I mean, I guess you could look back and see the breadcrumbs, but the movie's not setting you up that there's going to be a revelation at the end.
No.
And that is an interesting way to do it. I mean, again, just kind of following the thread of her life.
Yes. Yeah, and it seems intentional that Joan Baez wanted to sort of get some of these things about her life out publicly at this stage in her life, and to include them in the movie.
Yeah, so Allison went to like a screening of the movie with Joan Baez, I guess, when it came out.
Yeah.
And she said that Joan, if I'm getting this right, I might be getting that, she might have read this, but she for those who are listening, Andy and I are recording this several days after I had this conversation with Allison, so I don't remember everything. Even though you'll be hearing it right back to back. But Joan apparently said basically like she didn't want this movie and the story to come out until after both her parents were dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of makes sense. Like, and her sisters are gone too. So it's really just her from that nuclear family. And, so now she feels comfortable telling her kind of story. And that's, again, maybe why this never was, she never went on Oprah to talk about this or something, it wasn't that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. It's, I mean, and she's, like you said, she is very forthright about sort of acknowledging that I think what she says, if only 20% of the memories that I had are correct, that I have now are correct, then it's, then this is a serious thing that happened, and I'm glad that we've talked about it. It does, that does put you in a weird position as a viewer. Like, it's not a standard, believe the victim under, because she's saying like, I don't know what to believe. I don't know what happened and what didn't happen. That's like my dog is hacking something up all of a sudden. Unbelievable how much I'm being undermined in this quick hit we have here.
Yeah, I respect the fact that she's, obviously such an intelligent, well-read person that she's not just, taking for granted what she thinks happened, and she wants to paint a full picture of her parents in this and not just have it be all bad or all good or whatever. And I mean, that's reality, that's she's keeping it real.
Yeah. I mean, throughout her life, she was, I mean, I suppose it's no surprise based on her artistic career, but in her personal life and her letters, she's a remarkable communicator. She's very articulate and clever and clear spoken and sort of aware of herself. And she sort of, she holds herself accountable to a certain degree about being like young and frivolous and in search of fame in a way that I don't think anybody else would feel a need to like account for.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't seem like she was doing something all that irresponsible or what have you, but she really sort of is quick to mention that she quickly achieved a period of extended adolescence, and she enjoyed that, and I don't even know that it's fair to say that she like harbors guilt. She's just clear-eyed about it and talks about it as a thing that happened, and it's important to note that that's what was going on at that time.
Yeah, I mean, she talks about how she became addicted to activism, which is such a such an interesting perspective. I talked about that with Allison too, but it's just you just don't hear that often.
Right.
That it's not putting aside the value of any of the things that she was an activist about or for, but it does, allow her to reflect now on what she was spending her time on and what was motivating her. And it's, again,
although it does seem, in terms of one cause, it does seem that the boat people catch a stray here in the film. They specifically are mentioned alongside her saying, I was addicted to activism, as if like I even was going crazy about the Cambodian refugees. It's like, I don't know, that seems valid. Seems like a valid cause.
Exactly.
I don't know why we have to include that right now.
Exactly. A complaint, if anything, is something that we've often talked about, which is in a sub 2-hour documentary about a person that's had a 50, 60-year career, and whose most well-known work came in the 60s and early 70s. This doc flies through the last 30 years of her career. It's one of those things where like you're halfway through the movie and you look and it's 1963 and you're like, well, we're definitely not going to dig deep into some 1998 solo album she did or something. It's just not going to be mentioned. And I don't know. I mean, she talks about that time in her life in terms of the psychological issues she was having and her personal issues and things. But again, you just have to imagine there's more to be mined there as a creative, active person who was doing work and making records and, living in the world during that time. And, again, it's like there's not going to be, you know, it's not like the Beatles where there's going to be, 30 documentaries about every aspect of her life. So
Right.
this is kind of the one you're going to get. I mean, she's a big enough star that there'll be other stuff said about her, but in terms of a full length documentary about her, like there's not, we're not going to see a ton of them.
No.
So, on the one hand, you always want more, but
Yeah.
the movie does tell a story and focuses on what she wants to focus on. I mean, this is clearly her perspective.
Yeah, I think it strikes a pretty good tone on that count relative to many of the other movies we watch. I think, like the use of the farewell tour is right, where it shows you where her voice is right now, what the crowds are like, um, sort of her like indefatigable spirit in terms of being a touring musician and getting in shape for it, and working on her voice with her voice coach, and sort of the inevitability of decline in that respect. Like I think that much of it is like what I'd like to see how I'd like to see it used, compared to,
Right.
say, I don't know, Paul Simon, for instance.
Well, okay. Yes.
Right.
I will.
So
Yes.
I would say it lands on the right side of that one. She does like, I mean, she wants to like get out some things that she's not so stoked about in her life, and I think maybe unduly she like nails herself for the silliness of what she was trying to do in the 80s, sort
Yeah.
of, and there's like a clip of her at a benefit concert,
Right.
and
Singing
and
"Cheers
she's
for Fears" shout, and it really clangs pretty hard.
yeah, and she's like head in hand about it, and it's, I don't know, I mean, like a lot of old 60s and early 70s rockers were having a tough time in 1986. You like, give yourself
Yeah.
a break, Joan. It's all right. Like, have you seen some of these Glenn Frey music videos? Like,
Yeah. No. I hear you. It's clearly what she wanted to focus on, and I
Mhm.
get that. But I just have to imagine that there are deep Joan Baez heads, of which I can't claim to be one,
Yeah,
who find a lot of value in a lot of the work that she did. That's just not,
not mentioned here
this.
at all.
The point of this movie is not to. It's not like the Sparks movie where it's like every album is given
Yeah,
equal weight and focus, and that has its own value, but it's just a different kind of thing. But all in all, I would say, and this is important in a rock doc, is that Joan Baez seems like a great hang.
absolutely, absolutely. This movie, I mean, it changes quite a bit at around the 1 hour and 40-minute mark about what like a fun hang it is, because the subject matter changes. But those first 40 hour and 40 minutes, movie seems like a great hang. Joan Baez seems like a great hang. It's, yeah, it hits on that front for sure.
Right. Like if you have a picture in your head of who she is as a person and what she's like to be around and things like that, like, at this point, like, you know, the grandma or aunt or something that everybody wishes they had, like she she delivers on that point. And that
Totally. Yeah.
that's
And
you
well,
gotta,
and then and the name of the movie comes from what her like childhood diary, right?
yeah.
She's like an incredible writer from a very young age.
Yeah. Gifted illustrator, just a
Gifted
gifted
illustrator.
person. I
Yes.
mean, almost like if she hadn't happened to become world famous at 18 because she like walked into a coffee shop and immediately
Right.
became like the biggest recording artist in the country.
Yeah.
Like just based on her charisma and her voice and her everything.
Yeah.
She clearly would have developed some sort of artistic career doing
Yes.
something and
Yeah.
would have nailed it. And so, anyway,
So I
good
mean,
movie.
it would what do we? I imagine you talked about this a little bit. What did the amount of Bob Dylan? Right amount? Too much? Too little? Right tone?
Yeah,
Wrong tone?
it's hard. And we talked about the fact that, she's her biggest hit, Diamonds and Rust, really the only song that she's really known for writing primarily is about Bob and the fact that Bob hangs over her life and hangs over her piano.
Yeah. Yes.
She clearly wasn't avoiding the whole Bob subject.
Yeah. No, the way
It's
she
very
handles it is great, I think. Yeah.
it's hard for you or me or Allison, all of
Yeah.
whom are, just huge Bob heads, to
Yeah.
not lean forward when Bob shows up in a documentary about somebody else because he's such a magnetic figure, and
Yeah.
he's so you just know so much about him, and so it's not like they could do this movie without mentioning him, and I think it's the right amount.
Yeah.
He doesn't take. You don't end the movie and only be thinking about Bob. You know.
No. Yeah, I mean, I just was curious when I was going into it. I was like, how much are they going to do here? Because you don't want to imply in any way that Joan Baez is like that there's anything less than iconic about Joan Baez's entire career as a standalone entity, you know?
Right.
And yet, like the moment, as you say, the moment Bob Dylan enters the screen, like the screen is dominated by Bob Dylan during that period, you know?
Yeah, you can't avoid that.
Right. Right.
He's, there's very few people in the world who like have that thing where like that in any room, every head is turned towards them.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
Paul McCartney,
Right.
but it's like if you're, I don't know what, Michael Jordan. I don't know. That there's just some people that have that level of not just fame, but even in a room full of hugely famous people, that there's just a notch above. And so, yeah, you can't avoid that. It's a powerful tool in a film when you have Bob Dylan and footage of him, especially in the '60s. That
that young footage of them hanging out together and her doing her impression of him.
Oh, it's so good, so good. So yeah, right amount of Bob. I don't know if it was the right amount of Bob for her life, but for a film about her life, right amount of Bob, and respect to her again for not. She could hold a grudge about all the many asshole things that we know that he did, and probably 10,000 more that we don't even know about. But she clearly, she continues to sing his songs. I don't know how much, they're on a text chain. This is the thing Allison and I talked about.
They're both still like in shape and performing, right?
Our classic rockers. Oh. They probably all text.
Yeah.
Like how much would you pay to see like the text thread of like name 3? You know what I mean?
Honestly, I don't even. You know what?
Are they sending memes, Facebook links to Facebook that don't? You're like, what is this? Now I got to open this.
I'll negotiate down. I don't even need to see the subject. I just want to know which groups of people are on which text chains.
Right.
I just want to know which little friend groups have clustered themselves into group DMs.
Right. But my proposal was that there should be a congressional law that's passed that after all the people who are rock stars, musicians have died on a particular text thread, that thread needs to be then uploaded to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for study. Yeah. We need to keep this. We need this.
Yeah, these are documents. These are the words and letters of these musicians. They should be regarded exactly as if you found a diary,
right? Whoever it is,
or correspondence, letters of correspondence.
Right.
So yeah, without question, I would move to accept that. I would also.
You'll sign our GoFundMe, or change.org petition.
Change.org petition. I'm on that.
You got to be the change you want to see in the world, Andy.
Who do you think is most likely to be added to a group DM and to just resent it completely and to chime in only to mention that people are talking too much and that he wonders how they have so much time in the day? Like who's the group DM grouch?
I'm thinking maybe Neil Young, but like I don't know if he has a cell phone.
I could actually see Neil Young being like, "No, this is great, man." Like,
maybe
we're all, like, when was the last time we all got to talk together? Like I could see him like in the same way that he like embraced synthesizers when no one did. He's like, actually, no, this is a new wonderful form of communication.
I don't know. I mean, you could name. I don't know. Van Morrison probably doesn't have a cell phone. He has a song called "Why Are You on Facebook?" He definitely does not have a cell phone. I don't know.
It's a good song.
You got to imagine, like, imagine the surviving Beach Boys text thread.
Oh, geez.
Right? Mike Love just sending,
and then the
sending
the side,
clips from Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, there's like the multiple different side DMs that are to comment about the main DM where people are like, "Yo, is Mike okay? How much does he believe this stuff?"
Right. Yeah. Oh my God. I feel like future scholars have got to get a hold of this.
It'll be yeah.
All right. Anyway, so there you go. That was a semi-quick hit about Joan Baez. Anything else you need to say about this, or can we wrap?
We can wrap. I liked the movie. I'll probably watch this movie a handful more times in my life.
Good movie, and props to Joan. Keep on doing your thing.
It was the right voice at the right time. It just shot me in another whole stratosphere.
What does fame mean to you?
What fame actually is, I don't really know because I don't consider myself famous. I think there's a difference in being well-known and being famous.
If I could write my entire history, whether it has anything to do with facts, nobody will ever know because we remember what we want to remember. The panic attack stuff started early, and then the anxiety just heightened and heightened. I walk out on the stage and he said, oh, she looks so peaceful. Exactly the opposite of what was going on inside. But I was aware that there were sorrows way greater than mine. Nonviolent action was what I was born for. I knew that I belonged there. And then Dylan showing up.
Well, I'll be damned. Here comes your ghost again.
I was just there riding the wave with him. I think Dylan broke my heart because it was so shattering. That I admit. And I was really addicted to the activism. There's no way I could have been intimate, and I didn't know that yet. I'm not very good at one-on-one relationships. I'm great with one on 2,000.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around and turn me around.
There'll always be some regret no matter when I quit.
Turn me around, keep on walking.
Demons still come and go a little tiny bit, but not the way they used to.
Gonna build a brand new world.
Somebody asked me which decade I like. I said this one.